if your goals require that you don't stay lean. If your goals, and that was a real back assword way to say that, if your goals require weight gain of any sort, even in the sense maybe you're muscled as much as you need to be competitive, but you're in a position where it's like, okay, it doesn't make sense to continue to compete, thereby staying that lean is not productive. But how do we approach that? How do we determine really what is the degree, the rate of change that we can add on weight that is favorable, that gets us out of this like critical zone without overshooting? That's typically the question I get from a lot of people is, okay, post-show, how are we going to approach this? What's your strategy? How many pounds do you, like people asking me, Corey, how many pounds do you want clients to gain after they're done with their season? Now, a big part of this is going to be determined by how you prepped. I've had clients that have come to me that have prepped incredibly well. We have set ourselves up for a very, very productive post-show period, gaining phase. Yet after the show ends, they move into it and we realize, hey, there's a lot of work on the back end. There's a lot of noise, a lot of things that are dysregulated that maybe weren't communicated or we didn't realize. And I say we because it's like, yeah, I can encourage the client to speak up, but at the same time, like as a coach, I do try to keep a pulse on like, how is this person actually doing? Like, are they sharing all of the necessary information? Does it appear like, maybe they were super communicative and then all of a sudden they're a little more reserved, a little more guarded with sharing biofeedback around like discomfort, irritability, hunger, fatigue, depending on how they prepped. Yes, there is a point where I can say like, generally, you should see that reflected in how well you're able to come out of your contest prep. If you prep smart, if you prep in a way that is as sustainable as contest prep can be, you have an increased likelihood of that period being easier, as opposed to if you took a lot of extremes. I've had clients come to me who they're like, hey, I just wrapped up my season. I know it wasn't ideal. I want help on the way out of this because I'm very certain that this is going to be rough. I like the way that you're doing things. I like the way that your clients have reported, their experience has been post-show. I don't want to blow up. And that's what I've done previously. Blow up is always a really interesting term because it's like the weight that we're talking about needing to gain, it's not insignificant, particularly if you're like a 130-pound female. We're talking like anywhere from 5 to 10% within the first like 6 to 10 weeks. Ultimately though, this is going to come down to what can you do? What is feasible? Because again, I can tell you and be like, hey, you should only gain at 0.25% per week. I can set that out. I can put it in the timeline, pre-formulated and be like, this is the rate of gain. And if you stick to this, this should only be, a little bit over your maintenance. So you should be able to follow this reasonably based on how you prepped, based on where you were prior to starting prep. However, what you're able to do, what you're actually able to follow, your ability to adhere, the minimum that your adherence that I need from someone in terms of adherence, I need you to be able to follow the plan with minimal deviations. And I actually had a client this morning ask as well. She was like, hey, when you say deviations, what does that mean? Because like I have her on a meal plan. She understands macros and she's like, she's in a fat loss phase. She's like, I've recently started making substitutions for foods that are not as micronutrient dense. Is this okay? Or do you want me to report this as a deviation? And that's the case. I'm like, no, dude, like you are technically still hitting your macros. Like this isn't an overage that would actually affect our rate of gain. And if you were like being very honest about how you're macro matching, totally fine. Which by the way, that's what I allow my clients to do. Like, yeah, you want to macro match? That's okay. We can agree that a meal plan might be more favorable, but even in her case, I'm like, you're at the tail end of a diet and she's lost like 27 pounds. Like she's tiny. I'm like, yo, like we're at the point we need to wrap this up, but like, it's also falling in line with, okay, it's not necessarily that adherence is getting spotty, but there are adaptations that have now occurred that are presenting themselves that would indicate if we were to continue dieting, adherence would likely begin to slip somewhere in the near future. Maybe the next 4 to 6 weeks, maybe she could ride it out. But the idea is catch it before it gets to the red. And this is something, it's not just nutrition related advice or strategy, it's training, it's communication. Adherence is a big one with what I talk about, with what I do with clients, is like, you can hire me, but if you can't follow the plan, like, it's not a good plan. It means that something needs to change. It means that something on a daily basis is not occurring that allows you to see the value in not going off plan. Like, you've consistently made the decision that non-adherence is more favorable, consciously or subconsciously. That's not a jab. And like, it's funny. I've had a lot of clients that are like, hey, listen to the podcast. I'm just curious. Do you think I'm not adherent? Like, do we need to have a talk? Do you think I'm like practicing creative non-adherence? Like, one of my girls, she's such a sweetheart, such a trooper too. I mean, she's killed it. And she's like, yo, I do Zumba classes. Is this like creative non-adherence? I'm like, no, you're good. You're good. In her case, like, it's a very reasonable substitution for what her activity requirements are and like the agreed upon plan. So there's some degree of fluidity in that, kind of tying that back in to post-show. The bottom line is it does come down to what the client can adhere to. So I know I am going to contradict myself by saying like, this is the target rate of gain post-show, and these are the expectations you should aim to have, because I literally just said there's not a standardized way to do it. But the short answer is it depends on what you can adhere to. Some people, I'll tell you, like, they're very honest. It's always great when they're honest. Some people aren't as honest about it, but it's very apparent to me they're going to struggle post-show. And it's not necessarily about setting a target rate of gain. It's rather minimizing the amount of overshoot that's likely going to occur. And this is reflected in really their ability to communicate. Like, for the client that is like, no, I'm good. I want to reverse perfectly. I want to minimize body fat gain. Yet I can kind of see, like, at the end of prep, adherence is getting a little spotty. Yet they're not communicating that, but it's showing in other facets. I would say globally, a good like rule of thumb, a good range to at least aim towards or nearby in the first 6 to 10 weeks, gaining somewhere between 5% to 10% as a total increase in body weight. That's not like exclusive to muscle gain or fat gain. I mean, like, sure, you want to do the DEXA, go ahead. It's not very accurate, but I would say, like, you take a 130-pound female, okay, in the first 6 to 10 weeks, adding an additional 7 to maybe 13 pounds is right around like that, like 13, 15, like that's the upper end of what I want someone at. If they add it faster, if it comes on faster, assuming that it wasn't one of those things where it was like consistent overages, maybe the first few weeks I see like, oh, you're gaining at a rate of gain that's going to overshoot. You're going to be at 13, 15 pounds very quickly in the first like 4 to 6. I'm like, maybe we need to slow it down. Maybe we do. Realistically though, there are times where those clients, like, even if I said that, even though I might know that, hey, this is what's favorable, it's not realistic. It's not realistic based on their adherence. And it shows up in check-ins because people will be like, yeah, this isn't what I intended. This wasn't my plan A, but I kind of just broke. I kind of went a little crazier than I wanted to, but this was still the best I can do. If that is the highest that adherence could be, well, no, I'm not going to bust their balls about it. I mean, like, sure, there's a conversation quickly that needs to come around to how do we get you to increase that adherence? Like, do we need to raise the base plan? Was this overage inadvertently because, let's say, we had calories set too low? If that's the case, maybe it actually is favorable to have someone at a higher set plan, knowing that, yeah, they're going to gain weight faster than they'd like, faster than we would like, but at the end of the day, it's like, if that's what needs to happen, if that's what we need in order for them to have an improvement in adherence, okay, well, then that is more favorable than multiple weeks of failed adherence or diminishing adherence that over time begins to trend downwards.